here is the bias that the previous sentence ends with, the my side bias, and that bias expresses tribal thinking that evolution has gifted us. So they're saying that it's that this way of thinking, where we think in terms of the groups that we belong to and we value their position first before we think about, I guess, the rationality of the ideas, that's something that's come from our evolution. We tend to privilege or to bias towards group. I think it means to make visible or to force something to appear. To Yeah, I actually haven't really heard this used. Um, so it kind of implies it implies bringing something to light, but perhaps using a difficult process or a maybe an intricate process. So you could imagine, like, let's say that an object was tangled up in somebody's hair and you gradually worked it loose. I think that would be something similar to what they mean here. This test is supposed to separate things, but it's things that are difficult to separate. English, where it's about getting an answer out of somebody, making someone give you an answer. It's like an investigation. Yeah. From context, I see it as meaning forcing people to show their biases, or prompting them to do that through a difficult process. I've never actually seen this verb group used in writing before now. Difficult to overcome. Mm. Okay, so what they're saying is that the bias that we have, the preference that we have towards our own groups that we belong to, it's really hard to overcome that. It forces us, or it leads us, I should say, to behave in really irrational ways and to not reason well, to not make good decisions because of our connection to our own side or our own group in a dispute. So it's intractable because it's hard to get rid of, it's hard to get around, it's hard to remove it from the situation. Um, it means without reason. We act in an unreasonable way because of this connection that we have to groups that we are a part of. I really don't think that individual stubbornness is quite the same sort of thing. Um, I guess if someone was incredibly stubborn, then that might be intractable. Uh, but it doesn't necessarily lead to irrationality. Saying is that this bias that we have for our own team or our own group, that it's a really tough thing to overcome. It means that we are constantly doing unreasonable things or thinking in an unreasonable way. Um, you could say that a barrier was intractable. Like you could talk about uh, or you could even talk about an object being intractable. So, you know, we tried to help my friend move house, but the refrigerator was intractable. It was lodged in place. It couldn't be moved. Um, yeah. They don't mean like a football team. They mean like a political side or a perspective. I I mean, it could be a football team, but that would be really unusual. No, no, it's your okay. So they're talking about a situation um where you're looking for signs that people belong to your group or that they belong to your side in a dispute. Um, and those signs are more important than actual reasons to agree or disagree with something. So if if you say, "Oh, I believe, in equality. I believe in human equality. Humans should be treated equally." Um, but then someone points out to you, actually, your party's policy will lead to this form of inequality, and then it will lead to this form of inequality, and then it will lead to this form of inequality. And you say, and you can't see those reasons as legitimate because you're still connected to your party or you're still connected to your side of politics. Yeah, so you say that you believe something rational and that you're open to reasons, but in reality you're not. So I guess it could be like a football team if someone is disputing like refereeing decisions. Um, if they see refereeing decisions that are made against their team as being bad decisions just because it's against their team, then it would be the kind of thing that they're talking about here. No, it means thinking group first. You start with your group. Your group is always right. The group that you're part of is always right. So they're tribal, yeah, of primitive or of small scale groupings, social groupings. Yeah. Mm. So it's human evolution has led us to prefer to think in terms of the groups we belong to rather than to use our reason. So in the what they're saying is in the distant past, it was a big advantage to humans in their survival if they stuck with their group, right or wrong. But that bias now leads us to make bad decisions. Mm. I think it's the bias, but it could also be the test, the test for bias. It could be that. It's a bit ambiguous, to be honest. Mm. What it can do is it can force us to reveal, and so in that sense express, which is why it's ambiguous. I think the most obvious answer is that it here is the bias, but it could also refer to the test. Mm. So it's the kind of thinking where, like, I guess they're saying that a reasoning process could take different shapes. It could have different shapes. In one form of reasoning, you would consider all of the different pieces of evidence equally, treat them and evaluate them using impartial criteria. In another form of reasoning, you would filter out some of the evidence because it didn't belong to your group's way of seeing things. So, yeah, you're right. Directed reasoning, it sounds like a contradiction, but that's the point. Like they're saying that we actually do reason this way. We direct our reasoning to pay attention to some things and not others. A coalition, a voluntary uh, group or team or uh, alliance, maybe between different groups. A, a coalition is usually used to refer to a long-standing political association. Um, yeah, so they're not forced to work together. They're working together. Yeah, yeah. So in Australian politics, there's a long-standing coalition between the Liberal Party and the National Party. So they've agreed to long ago agreed to support each other in various parts of government. So no, so in this case, it's a political coalition. So they've agreed that they'll always vote together on certain kinds of legislation. So they'll always support like legislation to do with money if something needs to be funded, that one or the other has, but also they work together to make decisions about which laws will be passed. The Liberal and National are both kind of conservative parties, but the National are more of a rural and regional party, whereas the Liberals are more of an urban and suburban party. Mm.